$500 million. That's how much money Louisiana pulls from crawfish every single year. But here's what they don't tell you. The species fueling that empire shouldn't even be there. The red swamp crawfish, Procambarus clarkii, is one of the most successful biological invaders on planet Earth. It's conquered wetlands across 6 continents, collapsed native ecosystems, and turned Louisiana's waterways into a monoculture feeding ground. And instead of stopping it, we built an entire industry around harvesting the invasion. This is the story of how an ecological disaster became an economic gold mine, how destruction became dinner, and why the people profiting most might be the least interested in solving the problem. By the end of this documentary, you'll understand the hidden cost of every crawfish boil, the mechanics of invasion biology at industrial scale, and why Louisiana's most celebrated food is also its most controversial species. If you want to see how invasive species economics really work, stay until the end, because what you're about to learn changes everything about how we think that we understand biological invasions. Louisiana crawfish invasion, how an invasive species exploded into a $500 million takeover. Let's be clear from the start. This isn't a story about food. It's a story about conquest. The red swamp crawfish is native to a narrow band of wetlands and slow-moving rivers in the Gulf Coast states, primarily Louisiana and East Texas. But what makes Procambarus clarkii different from other freshwater crustaceans is its biological design for domination. It reproduces faster, tolerates dirtier water, survives droughts better, and outlasts almost every native competitor it encounters. And when humans decided to move it beyond its natural range, they unleashed one of the most ecologically destructive freshwater species ever documented. To understand what makes this species so successful, you need to understand its physiology. Red swamp crawfish can survive in waters with dissolved oxygen levels that would kill most fish. They tolerate salinity ranges from freshwater to brackish estuarine conditions. Their temperature tolerance spans from near freezing to over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. This environmental flexibility means they can colonize habitats that other species simply cannot occupy. They're not just surviving in these spaces, they're thriving, breeding, and overwhelming native competitors who evolved in more stable, predictable environments. The species also possesses remarkable dispersal abilities. During heavy rains, adult crawfish will leave water entirely and travel overland distances of up to a mile to colonize new water bodies. They can detect moisture gradients in the air and move toward them with surprising speed, covering ground at rates of up to 100 meters per hour. This terrestrial mobility is almost unheard of among freshwater crustaceans and gives Procambarus clarkii a colonization advantage that native species cannot match. Once they reach a new pond, ditch, or wetland, they establish burrows and begin reproducing within weeks. Their burrowing behavior itself is a weapon of ecological transformation. Unlike many aquatic species that depend on existing structure, crawfish create their own. They dig branching tunnel systems that can reach depths of 3 feet or more, with multiple chambers for aestivation, molting, and reproduction. These burrows don't just provide shelter for the crawfish, they fundamentally alter the hydrology and soil chemistry of wetlands. Water and filtration rates change, plant root systems are damaged, sediment composition shifts. A single healthy crawfish population can rework the physical structure of a wetland in just a few seasons, creating conditions that favor more crawfish and disadvantage native species that depend on stable substrates. Louisiana is ground zero, but not because the invasion started there. Louisiana is where we normalized it, where we stopped calling it a problem and started calling it a product. The state produces more than 90% of the crawfish consumed in the United States, 170 million pounds annually. That's not a typo. 170 million pounds of a single species pulled from artificial ponds and wild wetlands every single year. To put that in perspective, the entire commercial harvest of blue crabs in Louisiana, another cornerstone of the state's seafood economy, averages around 30 million pounds annually. Crawfish production is nearly 6 times larger.
The infrastructure supporting this harvest is vast. Louisiana has approximately 1,600 crawfish farms, covering roughly 250,000 acres of land. Most of these operations are small, family-owned farms, ranging from 20 to 100 acres, though some commercial operations exceed 500 acres. These aren't traditional fish farms with concrete raceways and sophisticated filtration. They're flooded rice fields and purpose-built shallow ponds, typically 2 to 3 feet deep, designed to mimic the natural floodplain habitat where crawfish evolved. The simplicity of the system is part of its economic appeal. Low capital investment, low operating costs, and high yields when conditions are right. But wild harvest is equally significant. The Atchafalaya Basin, the largest river swamp in North America, produces tens of millions of pounds of wild-caught crawfish every year. This 70-mile-long floodplain forest is a maze of bayous, backwater lakes, and seasonally flooded hardwood bottomlands. When the Mississippi River floods in late winter and early spring, water spreads across the basin floor and crawfish populations explode. Commercial fishermen set trap lines that stretch for miles through the swamp, targeting the dense aggregations that form in shallow overflow areas. The wild fishery operates with minimal regulation compared to terrestrial game hunting. No bag limits, no season restrictions beyond the natural availability of crawfish, and virtually no oversight of harvest methods. Thousands of farmers, processors, restaurants, and seasonal workers depend on this creature for their livelihoods. In rural parishes across southern Louisiana, crawfish season represents the difference between economic survival and collapse. Seasonal workers who process crawfish can earn several $1,000s over a 4-month period, income that's critical in regions where poverty rates exceed 25% and alternative employment opportunities are scarce. For rice farmers, the crawfish rotation provides 30 to 40% of annual farm income, transforming agriculture from a marginal operation into a viable livelihood. Restaurants from Lafayette to New Orleans base their entire spring menus around crawfish availability, drawing tourists who spend millions of dollars on boils, etouffees, and festival attendance.
Crawfish isn't just food in Louisiana. It's identity, it's culture, it's economics. And that's exactly why the ecological crisis beneath the surface gets ignored. The Breaux Bridge Crawfish Festival attracts over 100,000 visitors annually. The crawfish boil has been elevated to an art form, with competitions judging spice blends, cooking techniques, and presentation. Crawfish imagery appears on everything from restaurant logos to university mascots to tourism campaigns. The creature has been so thoroughly integrated into Louisiana's cultural identity that questioning its ecological role feels like an attack on the culture itself. And in a state where cultural preservation is a deeply held value, that makes honest ecological assessment nearly impossible. Here's the tension we need to confront. The same biological traits that make red swamp crawfish a devastating invader also make it a perfect commercial species. It breeds prolifically in shallow, muddy water. Females reach sexual maturity in just 3 to 4 months, compared to 1 to 2 years for many native crawfish species. A single female Procambarus clarkii produces between 400 and 700 eggs per clutch and can produce multiple clutches per year if conditions are favorable. That's a reproductive output that can increase population density by orders of magnitude within a single season. It grows fast, reaching harvestable size of 3 to 5 inches in 4 to 6 months under optimal conditions. Most native crawfish species require at least a year to reach comparable size. It tolerates poor conditions that would stress or kill competing species. High turbidity, low oxygen, elevated nutrients from agricultural runoff, warm water temperatures that exceed 85 degrees. None of these factors significantly impair Procambarus clarkii reproduction or survival. This pollution tolerance is critical in Louisiana, where agricultural runoff, industrial discharge, and urban wastewater create water quality conditions that many native species cannot tolerate. The crawfish doesn't just survive degraded habitats, it dominates them, often as the only abundant macroinvertebrate in heavily impacted waters. It's easy to trap in high volume using simple, low-cost methods. Unlike fish, which require nets, trawls, or hook and line techniques that demand skill and timing, crawfish are caught using baited traps that exploit their scavenging behavior. Set a trap with oily fish parts in shallow water overnight, and crawfish will congregate inside, attracted by scent plumes that can travel hundreds of meters through still water. The traps are cheap, typically costing between $5 and $15 each, and durable enough to last multiple seasons. A single operator can manage hundreds or thousands of traps with minimal equipment beyond a boat and basic handling gear.
The invasion characteristics are the profit characteristics, and that creates a paradox that no one in Louisiana wants to talk about. The ecological traits that make Procambarus clarkii a global threat, its fecundity, its environmental tolerance, its dispersal ability, its competitive dominance, are the exact same traits that make it an ideal aquaculture species. You cannot separate the invader from the commodity. They are the same organism, evaluated through different frameworks. To an ecologist studying wetland degradation in Spain, this is a catastrophic invasive species. To a rice farmer in Crawley, Louisiana, this is the difference between profit and bankruptcy. If we could eradicate this species, should we? And if the answer is yes, who's willing to sacrifice $500 million to make it happen? That's not a rhetorical question. It's the central dilemma of invasive species management when economic systems become dependent on ecological disruption. The Louisiana crawfish industry employs an estimated 7,000 people directly and supports tens of thousands more in ancillary industries. Crawfish season generates tax revenue that funds schools, roads, and public services in parishes that have few other revenue sources. The cultural events surrounding crawfish draw tourism that supports hotels, gas stations, and retail businesses across the region. Eradicating Procambarus clarkii from Louisiana's commercial waters isn't just economically unthinkable, it's logistically impossible. The species is too widespread, too abundant, and too deeply integrated into both natural and artificial waterways. Even if you could remove every crawfish from every commercial pond, the wild populations in the Atchafalaya Basin, in coastal marshes, in thousands of miles of drainage ditches and irrigation canals would recolonize those ponds within months. And even if eradication were possible, the political will doesn't exist. No elected official in Louisiana is going to campaign on destroying a $500 million industry to protect wetland ecology, especially when many of the ecological impacts are felt not in Louisiana, but in distant countries where Procambarus clarkii is a foreign invader. This is the uncomfortable reality of modern conservation. Sometimes the most ecologically rational decision is economically and politically impossible. And sometimes the species we should be fighting to control are the same species we've built our communities around. The Louisiana crawfish industry exists in a moral gray zone where local prosperity and global ecological harm operate on separate planes, rarely intersecting in public discourse. And as long as that separation persists, the invasion will continue to be celebrated rather than confronted.
The red swamp crawfish didn't spread across the globe by accident. It was deliberately moved, farmed, released, and forgotten. The intentional introduction began in the 1930s and 40s when crawfish farming started gaining traction in Louisiana. Farmers realized they could flood rice fields after harvest and stock them with crawfish, creating a dual crop system that generated income during the off-season. The model worked. It worked so well that crawfish aquaculture exploded across the southern United States. But then came the exports. In the 1960s and 70s, live crawfish were shipped to Asia, Europe, Africa, and South America for aquaculture experiments and biological research. The problem is that crawfish don't stay where you put them. They burrow, they migrate overland during rain. They survive in drainage ditches, irrigation canals, and temporary puddles. Once Procambarus clarkii escaped into the wild, containment became impossible. Let's talk about why this species wins. Red swamp crawfish reach sexual maturity in just 3 to 4 months. A single female can produce up to 700 eggs per clutch, and she can reproduce multiple times per year. They're also ecosystem engineers. They dig extensive burrow systems that destabilize wetland soils, alter water flow, and destroy vegetation that other species depend on. In regions with dry seasons, they estivate, which means they burrow deep into mud and wait out droughts in a metabolic stasis that can last for months. When the rains return, they emerge and reproduce immediately. This makes them nearly impossible to eradicate once they're established. By the 1980s, red swamp crawfish had invaded Japan, Spain, Kenya, and China. By the 2000s, they were in every continent except Antarctica, and in every region they entered, the pattern repeated. Native crawfish populations collapsed, aquatic plant communities were devoured, fish populations declined as crawfish consumed their eggs and competed for food. Rice farmers saw their crops damaged by burrowing, irrigation systems clogged with crawfish and their molted shells. The invasion was ecological, agricultural, and infrastructural all at once. But here's where the story gets complicated. In Louisiana, none of this was framed as invasion. It was framed as abundance. The rice-crawfish rotation became a model of agricultural efficiency. Wild crawfish populations in the Atchafalaya Basin provided free harvest opportunities for anyone with a boat and some traps. The species that was destroying ecosystems elsewhere was celebrated in Louisiana as proof of natural prosperity. And that celebration blinded an entire state to the ecological cost. Let's start with the damage, because it's extensive and it's measurable. Red swamp crawfish are voracious herbivores and opportunistic predators. In healthy wetlands, aquatic vegetation provides habitat structure, stabilizes sediment, filters water, and supports diverse food webs. Crawfish eliminate that vegetation. Studies in European wetlands have shown that Procambarus clarkii can reduce plant biomass by over 90% in invaded areas. Without vegetation, sediment erodes, water clarity declines, fish that depend on plants for spawning habitat disappear, invertebrate communities collapse. The burrowing behavior causes additional harm. Crawfish tunnels can extend 3 feet deep and compromise the structural integrity of levees, irrigation ditches, and rice field walls. In California, crawfish burrows have caused catastrophic failures in irrigation infrastructure, leading to millions of dollars in agricultural losses. In Spain, crawfish have undermined riverbanks and destabilized wetland soils to the point where native amphibians can no longer breed successfully. These aren't minor inconveniences, they're landscape-scale transformations driven by a single invasive species. Then there's the predation. Red swamp crawfish eat the eggs and larvae of native fish, amphibians, and invertebrates. They outcompete native crawfish for food and shelter. In regions where multiple crawfish species historically coexisted, Procambarus clarkii has driven natives to local extinction within decades. The ecological simplification that follows is profound. Biodiversity collapses, ecosystem resilience declines, and once crawfish dominate, reversing that dominance is nearly impossible without large-scale chemical or biological interventions that come with their own risks. Now let's talk about the benefits, because they're real and they're significant. The Louisiana crawfish industry generates over $500 million annually. That includes farm gate value, processing, distribution, restaurant sales, and tourism.
Crawfish season, which runs from late winter through early summer, employs thousands of seasonal workers in rural communities where alternative employment is scarce. For small-scale farmers, crawfish provide critical income that stabilizes family operations. For restaurants and festival organizers, crawfish culture draws tourists and sustains local economies.
The rice crawfish rotation is also water efficient compared to other forms of aquaculture. Farmers flood fields that would otherwise sit fallow, using existing water rights and infrastructure. The crawfish feed on decomposing rice stubble, requiring no supplemental feed. The system is low input, low technology, and accessible to small operators. From an economic development perspective, crawfish aquaculture represents a rare success story in rural America. But here's the paradox. The ecological damage that makes crawfish a global invader is irrelevant in Louisiana because the species is native to the region. Or is it? Crawfish populations in Louisiana today are astronomically higher than they were 2 centuries ago, driven by artificial flooding, habitat modification, and the elimination of natural predators. The line between native abundance and human-assisted hyperdominance is blurry. And while Louisiana might not face the same extinction crises seen in Europe or Asia, the state's wetlands are still experiencing degradation from crawfish activity, particularly in areas where water quality is already compromised by agricultural runoff and saltwater intrusion. So we arrive at the moral paradox. The invasion enriches Louisiana while impoverishing ecosystems elsewhere. The same species that funds schools and sustains families in Cajun country is collapsing biodiversity in Kenya and Spain. And the people profiting from the invasion have no incentive to acknowledge the global harm, because doing so would undermine the cultural narrative that frames crawfish as a gift rather than a curse.
Crawfish harvesting in Louisiana is a study in seasonal rhythms and labor-intensive extraction. The harvest begins in November and runs through June, peaking in March and April when water temperatures and daylight hours trigger peak reproductive activity. Most crawfish are caught in shallow ponds, either in purpose-built aquaculture systems or in wild-caught operations in the Atchafalaya Basin and coastal wetlands. The primary tool is the crawfish trap, a wire mesh cylinder or pyramid baited with fish parts, typically pogies, a type of oily baitfish. Traps are set in the evening and checked the following morning. In aquaculture ponds, traps are laid out in grids with spacing determined by crawfish density and water depth. A single farmer might run thousands of traps across multiple ponds, checking and emptying each one by hand. It's back-breaking work. Farmers wade through knee-deep water, pulling traps, dumping crawfish into floating baskets, rebaiting and resetting. On a productive day, a single trap might yield 5 to 10 pounds of crawfish. On a slow day, it might yield nothing. Wild-caught operations are even more labor-intensive. Fishermen navigate shallow swamps in flat-bottomed boats, setting trap lines that stretch for miles. These operations are weather-dependent, tide-dependent, and ecologically unpredictable. A flood can disperse crawfish populations, a drought can concentrate them. Water temperature swings can shut down feeding behavior entirely. Wild-caught fishermen operate on thin margins, gambling time and fuel costs against uncertain yields. Once harvested, crawfish are transported live to processing facilities or sold directly to wholesalers and restaurants. Live crawfish are kept in aerated tanks or wet burlap sacks to prevent die-off. Dead crawfish decompose rapidly and release toxins, making them unsellable. This creates logistical pressure to move product fast. From trap to table, crawfish have a narrow window of viability, which is why the supply chain operates at such high speed during peak season. Here's what's important to understand. Harvesting crawfish doesn't control the invasion. It doesn't even slow it down. The reproductive rate of Procambarus clarkii is so high that even aggressive trapping only removes a fraction of the population.
In fact, some research suggests that moderate harvesting pressure might actually increase crawfish reproduction by reducing competition and freeing up resources. This means that the Louisiana crawfish industry isn't solving an ecological problem, it's exploiting an ecological phenomenon. And as long as crawfish populations remain hyperabundant, the harvest will continue, regardless of the broader environmental consequences.
Once crawfish reach processing facilities, they enter an industrial system designed for volume and efficiency. The first step is purging. Live crawfish are placed in clean, aerated water tanks where they're held for 24 to 48 hours. During this time, they expel sediment, waste, and organic matter from their digestive systems, improving the quality and flavor of the final product. Purging is critical for crawfish harvested from muddy ponds or wild environments where water quality is inconsistent. After purging, crawfish are sorted by size. Grading is typically done using mechanical sizers that separate crawfish into small, medium, and large categories. Size determines price. Large crawfish command premium prices for boils and restaurant service. Small crawfish are often directed toward processed products like tail meat or bisque. This grading process happens at high speed, with workers and machines processing thousands of pounds per hour during peak season. Next comes the boil. Live crawfish are dumped into industrial boiling tanks filled with salted water and seasoning blends. The boil is fast and hot, typically lasting 3 to 5 minutes. The goal is to cook the meat through while locking in moisture and flavor. Overcooking makes the meat rubbery. Undercooking leaves it unsafe. The temperature, timing, and seasoning ratios are carefully controlled, often treated as proprietary formulas by processors. After boiling, crawfish are rapidly cooled using ice or cold water baths. This stops the cooking process and prevents the meat from becoming mushy. Whole boiled crawfish are packaged for retail or food service, but a significant portion of the harvest is processed further. Workers extract tail meat by hand, separating it from heads and shells. This is skilled, repetitive work, often performed by immigrant labor crews who are paid by the pound. Tail meat is then packaged, frozen, or vacuum sealed for distribution. Some facilities also produce value-added products. Crawfish fat, harvested from the head cavity, is sold as a concentrated flavoring for sauces and etouffees. Shells are ground into meal for use in pet food or agricultural fertilizer. Even the boiling water, rich in crawfish oils and seasonings, is sometimes captured and concentrated into liquid flavorings. The scale of these operations is staggering. A mid-sized processing facility might handle 50,000 pounds of live crawfish per day during peak season. The largest operations process over 1 million pounds per week. This industrial capacity is what transformed crawfish from a seasonal delicacy into a year-round commodity. Frozen crawfish tail meat allows Louisiana crawfish to compete globally, even outside the harvest season. And that global reach amplifies the economic importance of the invasion, making it even harder to challenge the system.
In Louisiana, crawfish isn't just food, it's ritual. The crawfish boil is a communal event, rooted in Cajun and Creole traditions that date back generations. The process begins with the purchase of live crawfish, typically sold by the sack in weights ranging from 20 to 50 pounds. Freshness is non-negotiable. Live crawfish are active, responsive, and free of strong odors. Dead crawfish are discarded immediately. Before cooking, crawfish are rinsed and purged if they haven't been already. Home cooks soak them in salted water to help remove residual mud and grit. Some add lemon, vinegar, or beer to the purge water, claiming it improves flavor, though the science on this is debatable. The purging process can take 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how clean the crawfish were when purchased. The boil itself requires a large outdoor pot, often 40 to 80 quarts, set over a propane burner. Water is brought to a rolling boil and heavily salted. Louisiana crawfish boils are not subtle.
Salt levels can exceed 1 cup per gallon of water, creating a brine strong enough to season the crawfish from the inside out. To this base, cooks add proprietary spice blends, typically heavy on cayenne, paprika, garlic powder, and bay leaves. Some boils include lemon halves, onions, garlic heads, and whole peppercorns. Once the water is seasoned, vegetables are added first: potatoes, corn on the cob, and occasionally mushrooms or artichokes. These soak up the spiced brine and serve as sides to the main event. After the vegetables have cooked for about 10 minutes, the crawfish go in. The boil is fast, 3 to 5 minutes of hard boiling, then the heat is cut and the pot is covered. This is where the magic happens. The crawfish soak in the cooling spiced liquid, absorbing flavor without overcooking. Soak times vary from 10 to 30 minutes, depending on desired spice intensity. When the soak is complete, the entire pot is drained and dumped onto a table covered with newspaper or butcher paper. The mound of crawfish, potatoes, and corn is a centerpiece. Eating is hands-on, communal, and messy. Diners twist the tail from the head, pinch the shell, and extract the meat. Enthusiasts suck the heads, extracting the flavorful fat and juices that concentrate during the boil. The process is slow, social, and deeply tied to Louisiana's cultural identity. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Every crawfish boil, every étouffée, every bisque normalizes the invasion. Food culture has made Procambarus clarkii invisible as an ecological threat because it's been reframed as tradition. And that reframing is powerful. It's hard to convince someone that a beloved cultural practice is ecologically harmful, especially when the economic benefits are tangible and the environmental costs are distant or abstract. This is how invasive species become embedded, not through ignorance, but through integration.
So let's return to the question we started with. How did an invasive species turn into a $500 million takeover? The answer is a combination of biological advantage, economic incentive, and cultural normalization. Red swamp crawfish possessed the traits necessary to dominate new environments. Humans provided the transportation, habitat, and markets to make that dominance profitable. And Louisiana's food culture transformed ecological conquest into culinary celebration. But at what cost? The global damage is undeniable. Crawfish invasions have collapsed fisheries, degraded wetlands, and driven native species toward extinction across multiple continents. The economic benefits accruing to Louisiana don't erase the ecological debts accumulating elsewhere. And the longer we treat crawfish as purely a resource rather than a liability, the harder it becomes to address the broader crisis of biological invasions. Who really benefits? In the short term, Louisiana benefits. Farmers, processors, restaurant owners, and seasonal workers all profit from the abundance. But in the long term, the beneficiaries might be far fewer. As climate change alters water availability and temperature regimes, crawfish populations could become less predictable. As global awareness of invasive species grows, export markets might face restrictions. And as Louisiana's wetlands continue to erode due to subsidence, saltwater intrusion, and yes, crawfish activity, the ecosystems that support the industry could degrade beyond recovery. Here's the final uncomfortable truth. The Louisiana crawfish industry is built on the assumption that abundance is permanent. But ecological systems don't work that way. Invasive species often experience boom and bust cycles. Populations explode, resources deplete, and crashes follow. We're currently in the boom phase, and no one wants to imagine the bust. But history tells us that systems dependent on ecological disruption are inherently unstable. The question isn't whether the crawfish industry will face a reckoning. The question is when, and whether Louisiana will be prepared.